I'm Christiane Amanpour in London. Thank you for joining us for this special Frontline Amanpour and Company collaboration. The film that you've just seen, 1,000 Cuts, is a searing look at the threats posed to democratic values and to the journalists who are fighting to uphold them. Much has happened since filming concluded in 2019. So joining me now is director Ramona Diaz and Maria Ressa, the CEO of Rappler. Welcome, both of you, to the program. Maria, you're an old and long-standing colleague of mine from your days and years at CNN. Ramona, good to have you here. Let me just ask you, Maria, you're not known as a sort of a cult of personality journalist. How did it feel for you to have yourself followed and for you to be the center character in this story on film now?
Difficult at the beginning until I realized that my rights were being abused and that I needed to stand up for myself. So a lot of things happened simultaneously, really. A shift in thinking from our old way of thinking of journalism, which is to take yourself out of the picture. I was in it. And then the second one was, what do I do to protect my rights? That's also unfamiliar.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Let's bring Ramona in. Ramona, I wonder whether you also feel potentially a bit of that burden and responsibility that putting out Maria's story and the story of Rappler is also telling the world and putting the world on notice that we have her back. Whatever happens to her will not happen in darkness or in silence.
Hi, Christiane. Thanks for having us. I always feel the burden of responsibility. Because I am a Filipino American, I film a lot of Filipino stories. And basically what I do is I unpack or decode what's happening in the Philippines to the rest of the world. So I always feel that anyway, but more so, in 1,000 Cuts, because it was life unfolding before the lens. I had no idea where it was going to go, but neither did Maria. So that was sort of this joint exploration, joint journey. But you feel it. You know it's happening on the ground, and you know that I also had like a first row to history in a way. Like I always do, but more so with 1,000 Cuts.
You know what? It's really interesting that you identify for everybody as Filipino American, because also you are as well, Maria. And I guess it must be harder to be a resident of the country that you're reporting on so bravely and, in a form of sort of opposition. Maria, you, since this film was completed, are appealing what is known as a cyber libel conviction. You have several other cases pending against you. You were denied your request to leave the Philippines to visit your mother in the United States and your relatives. Tell me where your legal status stands right now.
Ongoing. I mean, the court cases continue. There are 8 when the film was going on. And just on November 27th, I had to post bail for a 9th case. That's a 9th criminal case. So it's a new cyber libel case, this time for posting a screen grab of a newspaper article, tweeting it. So now I'm facing another charge, 9 criminal cases. Where's it going to go? Christiane, I just keep doing my job. And I put one foot in front of the other. And I know that the way this will play out will depend on how well I do my job now.
Maria, in an interview several years ago when Duterte was still mayor, before he was president, he admitted to you that he had killed. I mean, it was quite startling. And you are at his throat now for what you call, and what many in the international community call, extrajudicial killings. When he made that statement to you then, what was going through your mind?
Shock, but disbelief. And then, as a reporter, asking the questions, just kind of like watching a car crash, right? You can't believe that you were looking at this and listening to it. Refreshing in a weird way. But of course, after 4 years of this, and we see this every day, we live through the kind of impunity that you've seen in the film, and it gets worse. So we know what's at stake. And I guess I told you, I feel like I'm fighting for my rights. That's only the first part. I feel like We have to hold the line, because if we don't, our democracy will fundamentally change. It's dying in front of our eyes. The crash happened in plain view. So can we resuscitate it? Can we uphold our rights? And that's a lot of responsibility. And I guess that's part of the reason the fight is worth it.
And I guess, as you say, your democracy looks like it's dying in front of your eyes. That's the point of using the title 1,000 cuts. Each cut is another cut into the muscle and the brain of democracy. So, Ramona, I know you don't talk about Trump in this, and of course Trump is moving on into the sunset as we speak right now, but it has been a period of years when democracies, even in the Western world, have been under threat. And I found it really fascinating how you found two main characters who were very passionate Duterte supporters and who, you know, they were lobbying for him, and they didn't seem to equate the risk to their democracy, or they equated it as him upholding it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, they really bought into it. But I don't think, you know, for people like the General and Mocha, they have to believe in something good, right? They have to believe that what they're doing is good for the country. And because and that's why I really, I thought it was important to have them in the film, because no one thinks of themselves as anti-heroes. No one thinks of themselves as the ones that will destroy democracy. So they think of it as the opposite, as the ones who will uphold democracy. And I found them fascinating, especially I think with the General. He was both, he's also a jester, like he does karaoke, he sings, but he's also menacing, because underneath all that joking, you know, is like, he says, well, if you don't clap for me, you're a drug dealer, right? There's always that threat. And I thought that contradiction in Bato was what was very interesting. And of course, Mocha, obviously, I knew she had a personal story. She couldn't have had. Everyone has a personal story. And I wanted to know what it was for her that kept her very loyal to Duterte, right? She had considerable following on social media, and she put all that, you know, to campaign. To support the president in the beginning. She was one of the first ones. And he paid her handsomely for it by offering her a spot in the administration. And of course, she has her personal history. Her father was a judge who was assassinated. So she saw Duterte as someone who would, you know, avenge her father's death, because she felt like no one ever did.
And it's also interesting because one of Maria's investigative reporters, she is quoted in there, Patricia Evangelista, who's saying about Duterte's popularity during that campaign, he offers not just change, he offers revenge. I do think it's an incredibly interesting case history in what's kind of become known as almost the victimhood of politics. Everybody is a victim. Everybody's looking for their savior. And everybody, you know, adjusts the truth or facts to suit their narrative. Maria, talk to me about that desire for revenge among people.
It's the haves versus have-nots, right? I mean, the gap between the rich and the poor in the Philippines, for example, has always been large. And this is the decades of liberal democracy that hasn't trickled down far enough. And that's part of what President Duterte appeals to.
You know, the Philippines is unusual in terms of it offers 1 6-year presidential term, not a re-election. Do you think that Duterte, from everything you've seen and everything that he's shown himself to be, will step down after the 6-year term? He's got a couple of years left at least.
I mean, what we've seen during the pandemic, we've had the longest lockdown, right? We still haven't really come out of the first one. And during this time period, the Duterte administration consolidated power, a lot of power, shut down the largest broadcaster, lots of attacks against the press, and they are gearing up for presidential elections. So even though it may not be President Duterte running, his proxies are all in place. Candidates, his daughter is a potential candidate for president. The man who is a close aide who's become a senator also now seems to be putting his hat in the ring. You know, power consolidates power. And this is still about power and money, and this administration has amassed a lot of that.
Ramona, you did put a clip of the President Duterte's daughter in the film, and you've spoken about her. I want to know what you make of her. What is she like? Is it like the apple, dropping from the tree? Is she different from her father? What is the realistic possibility of Duterte's daughter?
Sara Duterte is Sarah Zimmerman Duterte. She is biracial. Her mother is Jewish American, actually. She's like her father because I think she's tough. She is known as the slugger because she punched the sheriff once for not doing her bidding, and she loves that story. She tells that story all the time, and she goes around Davao in her Harley. So she has this tough image, but she doesn't have the dirty mouth of her father. Mm-hmm. She has a very clean, she stays away from that. But I think she will be as tough, and she has already laid the groundwork.
Let's talk about what's really at the heart of all this crisis, and that is an inability to separate, truth from fiction, an inability to separate real news from what's on social media. The Philippines, along with parts of India, along with Myanmar, are notable for the fact that news equals social media. It's almost like your newspapers or television stations, news stations just have zero impact whatsoever. In fact, Reporters Without Borders ranks the Philippines 136 out of 180 for press freedom, but it is called, back in 2018, even Facebook called the Philippines patient zero in the global spread of misinformation. So this applies to the United States, it applies to Europe, it applies to many, many parts of the world. Tell me why it is so destructive in a country like the Philippines, or is it just the same as it is in the US, Maria?
Absolutely the same, more destructive in a country like the Philippines because our institutions are weaker. Look, jumping off your conversation about Sara Duterte, Facebook on September 22 did 2 takedowns of influence operations, one of them from China, the other from the Philippines that was linked to the police and the military. The one from China that was also creating fake accounts for the US elections was also campaigning for Sara Duterte for president. If we don't deal with this, news organizations, any real human endeavor will become impossible if you cannot tell fact from fiction.
Yep.
And that is, unfortunately, the reality we have. Regardless of whether Biden wins, that system, the world's largest distributor of news, can't tell the difference between fact and fiction.
One of the great moments that Ramona captures is you just before an event where you're with your sister in a hotel room in the United States, and she's trying to convince you to wear this special dress that she'd picked out, these glittery high heels. But you were being also, you didn't want to do that, that wasn't what your look, but you also were trying to reassure her about how you have made your peace with the possible danger, not to mention the possible long-term sentences you might receive. Just end us with how you make your peace with this.
The way I've dealt with the last 4 years is to prepare myself for worst case scenarios. It's like going on coverage, right? You think of the absolute worst thing that can happen, and then you prepare for it. And then everything else that happens is actually gravy compared to this worst thing that you're prepared for. Look, strangely enough, despite my anger, once the vaccine is out and we can go out again, the world is fundamentally different. Mm-hmm. And the exciting part about this time period is that it matters, right? What we are doing, fighting for our rights, fighting for our democracy, fighting for the facts. I mean, Christiane, this is an important time. And then beyond that, to be part of helping create a new world, a better world. That's an incredible privilege. That's what I look forward to.
Well, and everybody can see it in 1,000 cuts. Maria Ressa, Ramona Diaz, thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us for this special Frontline Amanpour and Company collaboration. For more, please check out both programs on YouTube and Twitter, and stay with us. Amanpour and Company is next on most PBS stations.